I should say that there was another RFP so the other thing that started happening is admission essays in the schools. People were cheating on those too. And you'd think they couldn't because it's personal, but they did.
In today's episode, we have Christian Storm with us, who has been the CTO and co-founder of Turnitin. Turnitin has been making waves since 1998 by upholding students to higher standards by building one of the finest tools for plagiarism detection. He's here today with us. He speaks about how he has built his company and along with the other three co-founders.
The other one was back in the day where someone would type their paper in Word, print it out and hand it in, or as we like to say, turn it in.
Now he is going to talk more about it. So Christian, Turnitin is such a big name. Could you talk about how it all started?
Yeah, so kind of rewinding the tape back to just before. So I graduated from college, took 2 years off, and then decided to go to grad school. I'd been at MIT Lincoln Labs and enjoyed the research work. I knew I didn't want to be a professor, but so applied to some schools, interested in biophysics, neural networks in particular. And so I ended up going to University of California, Berkeley. And how it works there is most people come in with either a physics degree or a biology background. I had the physics end, so I had to take some biology type classes and other interest classes. And then you have these qualifying exams, and you go into laboratory rotations. So the first lab I picked based on what the work was being done was the Freeman lab, and ended up, the idea is you'd stay there for a semester. I asked if I could stay. I really enjoyed the work or what they were doing. And in that lab, I met John Barry, who had been in that lab for some time. And he had been doing work he would help teach as a graduate student instructor or graduate student assistant, helped teach us large upper division class, general interest class on basically, I think it was called brain, body, and behavior. And in that class, which was hundreds of students, the work being done was basically a few papers that they had to write. So being an entrepreneurial minded person himself, John took it upon himself starting in 1994. And this is early days of the internet. Started creating courseware for this site. In particular, what he realized, and is still true to this day, is as a graduate student, you're basically introduced to the whole concept of peer review, writing research papers in the sciences and then reviewing other people's work. But in undergraduate, you're not exposed to that. So he built the system to do just that, which was have students peer review each other's work. And so, I could go on about that. I mean, it was really interesting that
please go on.
Yeah. So the idea being, having been a GSA myself, reading papers or grading people's homework, you would do as you don't get paid a lot, so you kind of do as minimal amount as possible. So in a context of a paper, you might get a couple scribbles here and there, and then A, and then or a C. You're like, why did I get a C? Maybe there's a little more explanation of that. And so the idea with the peer review, you'd not only have your peers, so it was double-blind anonymous. So you'd get randomly assigned 2 papers, you would grade them and give feedback, and there was, forms. So instead of just, A, good job, you'd get all this different feedback, and as well as the graduate student assistant. And, the students loved it. And, the thing he did, which was genius and, still applies today, is that he also allowed the students, from prior years or subsequent years rather, read prior year work. And once everything was submitted, you could read each other's work, so you could see, okay, I got to see what does an A paper look like, or what is it,
Right.
that sort of thing. So, and the students love that, of course. Finally get to see what good work or what, maybe why they didn't do as well or what they could learn from their peers. And also give feedback in a way they probably haven't done before, critical analytical feedback. But you can imagine what happened. So all of a sudden, after this was like 1994, after like the first year, students come marching in into his office hours. Like, I know so and so took a paper and from last year and submitted it. There's so many students that it'd be random chance that a GSA would recognize it was a plagiarized paper, and more so, people are complaining. So he developed the first detection algorithm that just took their, the prior year's papers and this year's papers, so you could actually check, catch collusion, and then run them through, and that was like Gen 1 of the product in some ways. This is, and lo and behold, he found quite a few. So that got baked into the program, and in 1996, he actually wrote with David Presti, the main teacher of the class, a paper in Science Magazine, the World Wide Web as an instructional tool, and talking about this experience. And the editor asked, like, okay, what was, if you forecast one issue with the internet, it all sounds great, but what's the dark side of using the internet for education? And he's like, plagiarism.
And this is in 1994 or 1995?
No, so the paper is 1996. I joined, let's see here, I joined in probably around 1997-ish, maybe 98. So meanwhile, he's, started doing research, like, and this is when the bubble is growing in Silicon Valley, that in being an entrepreneur himself, he realized there's maybe a business here. This scourge of plagiarism is all over the place. Funny enough, as a quick aside, there was another company forming about then that has grown much bigger than Turnitin, which is Google. And we'd been using their research search engine, but they actually wrote a paper. It was either Page or one of them, I think, was authoring a paper called Scam, which they had actually created their own plagiarism detection system. I guess thankfully they went the Google route, probably then choosing our route. We were always worried about Google, like, okay, they have it and they're baked in their DNA. When are they going to create their own system? Sorry for myself, I wasn't out having fun, but he was there, and I guess that impressed him enough for that, I'm a hard worker, and he kind of leaned over, and I didn't really know him that much. He's like, but he knew I had, technical skills and writing code, and, he's like, hey, I have this idea, would you be interested? And I'm thinking, what do I have to lose? I'm young. So I was like, yeah, let's explore it. So that was, so there was a formation day that, we all met in the library and talked this over. And in some ways that was the formation of the company. And then there was the later, creating an official company, an LLC or an Inc. at that time. And funny enough, as a quick aside, Turnitin, the company now, they have 2 days in their calendar called Founder Days that the whole company gets off, and it's those 2 days. So I'll leave it at that.
You spoke about the Freeman Lab. Could you talk more about that pivotal moment for you that you said yes, or when you were introduced to the idea of Turnitin? I think back then you were calling it plagiarism.org, if I'm not mistaken. I have this photo with me.
Yep, that was the initial website. You're correct.
And what was that pivotal moment for you to say yes? Like, I'm sure you would have thought a lot about it.
It's probably more subtle. I was very much there for my PhD, but it was more like, I'd be willing to hear you out. And then, kind of, it didn't like, okay, drop everything, we're going to do this, because we were all new to this game. So it kind of
Mm-hmm.
grew organically, I would say, in terms of, so, and, the founding group, the four of us were all kind of connected to John. Um, so, and there were other people involved at that point, but they kind of, there's a lot of people that came and went, but, the four of us remained. Responsibilities to speak of. You have time, you have energy. You may not have experience, but that is the time to do it. As you grow older, it's more and more difficult. There's a lot of demands on you, but it's still possible. But it's just if you have an idea, run with it. Um, Stop thinking about it and talking about it. Just do it.
Mm-hmm. And for you, when you took this, opportunity to yourself to make it happen, did the idea stayed with you for a certain time before you said, I'm going to continue doing this and, strive for it, or it was always from day one or point one, you're going to just like go for it? Like, how was it like for you?
Yeah. So I guess it's a good question. And this, so in hindsight, everything kind of falls into place. But if I were to think back, so I said yes. We had these meetings, and then we had started working on like what's the software. We had to incorporate a company at that time, and they still do. The Haas Business School has a business plan competition. So John, and you can take this course where you essentially it's to write this competition thing document. So we submitted it. We didn't win. But we had a solid business plan now. And funny enough, one of the angel investors was someone teaching that class. And there's a couple things that happen. One is create the product, and this will answer your question eventually. There's all these demands, like trying to build a company and then take other people's money, how to do that, and then eventually, okay, get some of these pieces in place, raise money to make this company a bona fide
Mm-hmm.
company. So to answer your question, until there was traction with all those variables, it was kind of like, I did finish my PhD, just FYI, and on time. But there was kind of like, I was leaning on my PhD foot more than the other foot. I was like, I'm not going to go all in on that and have it ruin my other potential career. But as we went along, and another funny anecdote about ed tech is back then when we're trying to raise money, trying to raise money for an educational technology company was very difficult. You go in there and the VCs would tell you, education is a dog. It's a slow sales cycle, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, yeah, but the market's huge. And, right. So they are correct. It is a slow sales cycle. But as we can see, there's, plenty of business and need there. So, long story long, it was hard to raise money from the traditional routes. So we basically did a friends and family round and got some angel investors, just kind of scouring the earth for money.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely bootstrapped company. I think all in the beginning, we maybe raised a little over $1 million. No one was getting paid for a long time, which is kind of why people came and went. It's like, how much do you believe in this? And, it was slow going, a slog. We're getting positive feedback, but, the money wasn't pouring in or anything like that. And there's problems galore to deal with. So to answer your initial question, I always had, I had a foot in the other drawer, but I was like, this is a real problem. We were getting a lot of media attention. which is
Hmm.
also, there's enough positive signals that I still believed in it. I didn't leave like some other people. Um, and but as another side, it's just kind of lost to time. In order to appease the VCs and all of the world, we started coming up with all these different ideas for how we could do an adjacent type play. Like for instance, at that time, Napster was a big thing
Yeah.
for music sharing. So we're like, oh, we can basically create a Shazam like
Uh-huh.
service where we would be able to detect copied works. And we pitched that, and that actually kind of had some traction. And then they're like, well, where's the product? We're like, well, we just have to build it. And, the VC, I remember he was this kind of brash young kid. And he's like, well, I can give you $100,000 and take half the company. I'm like, we're like, no. um, so I always had my eye on the plagiarism bit. I think
Hmm.
everybody else was kind of groping around. I'm like, this is, I always just say, this is our golden egg. We got to lean into this. So, I'm glad we did. But so thankfully, yeah, I mean, that's all it took. We did that one friends and family, and we got enough
And
business.
when was this $1 million you mentioned that you raised? What was, is it 1999?
Yeah, and it was around maybe 99 ish, I think, because it was pre internet bubble burst, which was what, like 2000, 2001.
Right,
Um,
right. And so when you look back right now, what were those the first 3 years when you guys had that money, like about $1 million? How did you think about money? Where did you, like, when you right now look at it, of course, I mean, you can look back and say that we messed up here and there, but while you were doing this, how did you think about using that money for where? Could you talk more about it?
yeah, so the company benefited from free labor from us all. So it really went into a few things. One is, I can tell you about building the service, which would be extremely different nowadays than it was back then. But we had to get servers. We had been running them out of our house and stuff like this. So we got a small server room and had to buy servers,
Mhm.
and rent for that. And then eventually we got a small office space. I think our first couple hires, I think our first hire was a salesperson. We need to generate revenue. And secondly, I think we hired some technical people. One person's still there to this day.
Oh my God.
And so we basically, it was, I would say, reactive. Like, what are our needs? We need to sell more. We need to build this thing out. It was really the two.
Could you talk more about, was that an outlier for you guys, or was it shot in the dark the way you got it? And what role do you think that these kind of maybe I don't know if I should call it an outlier plays
Yeah,
in
no,
kind
it's
of
very much an
you guys?
outlier. Yeah.
Yeah. So could you talk more about how to probably how did you guys attract an outlier?
Well, this is, again, I would think it was harkening back to the beginning, talking about experience. I don't think any of us would even have crossed our radar to think about this sort of thing. And it took someone like Chet, who was like plugged in to all these things, to
Mhm.
know that there was even, I don't know if they call it in England RFP, but it was basically an RFP, big one. Um,
Mhm.
and so, there's, those sort of deals they require a lot of work. They're binary, either you get them or you don't. But they can be hugely impactful. Typically RFPs, even nowadays, we tend not to. And we'll do them with a Cadley company I'm with now, but typically they're written in a way that usually they have a vendor in mind. It's just they have to go through this process. So,
Right.
um, but right. So, yeah, I guess advice to other entrepreneurs: certainly keep a lookout for these big opportunities, but realize the success rate on them is probably pretty low. But I guess pick wisely. In that case, we had a pretty good story to tell because we were the first to address it. There was other fledgling, but we had better features and whatnot. So that I should say that there was another RFP for. So the other thing that started happening is admission essays in the schools. People were cheating on those too. You'd think they couldn't because it's personal, but they did. And that RFP we actually lost to a local supplier, if you will. So.
Could you talk about the product, how it was kind of being evolved as you were, kind of encountering all these new problems or new RFPs and new situations? Like how you were thinking about it, first of all, what was like the thought process, and then what actually happened?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll just come right off the bat. Anytime you build something, I would say our first product was very much an MVP. Try not to go too broad, but go deep with some people and just delight them. The caveat that is, you're going to get a lot of requests for features, and some of them are probably pretty bespoke to them, or so finding the signal and the noise from the feedback. You don't. We always pointed to back then Microsoft Word, which was, it really was just a write in, but there was like a feature explosion, of what you could do with it. So it was, so we didn't want that. So feedback, I would say, guided us as well as our own vision in terms of the evolution of the product. An early one was when we went to Berkeley's ethics office and showed them what we could do. They're like, well, how do I prove that to a student and their parents that are probably going to get involved that they in fact cheated? Because at that point, where originality report was just, we had like a little color bar of like green to red, and in between it was just a score, which was akin to what AI plagiarism detection is today. But so I went to this Santa Fe Institute summer school in complex systems. And while there, I wrote up our first, originality report, which was essentially take the document and take all the matches and then basically paint it with the different matches, and then have like so you could see how much and where came from what source. And then like we created a side-by-side report so you could open that website and your paper and see exactly, it was irrefutable. So that was like one example. And then one of kind of feedback. The other one was, this is back in the day where someone would type their paper in Word, print it out and hand it in, or as we like to say, turn it in, hence the name.
Yeah.
So we're like, this is, silly because, here you have this system where the people print it out, and this is when like Blackboard and was getting started, and there's these learning management systems where the grades would go. So there was like this digital analog step that was not necessary. Furthermore, save a lot of paper. Furthermore, all this grading could be done digitally. So that's where we started building out what that time was called GradeMark, which was the ability for teachers to grade the paper using a rubric and, different modalities to mark up the paper. And then we also brought in peer review, which was, what started this all into the service. And this was also a chance for us to have more products to sell. Eventually we flipped it to, it's just one price and for all of it, because we weren't getting that much uptake. Right. So, and then, learning management systems, we had to plug into those. As the ecosystem evolved, we get involved with it. But we did also, kind of like GIST, the other thing for ed tech, especially back then, was kind of hitching your cart to publish your horse, if you will. So we did deals like Pearson and Thompson, where they would bundle our service with their textbook as a way to sell more textbooks. In other words, they could compete with their, their competitor and
Mm-hmm.
offer this, add-on for free, and that would get more sales. So we, take these pin codes, teach the student would have to go buy it at the, or give it out for free with the book at the bookstore. And, but so with that relationship, it was like, oh, we need this. They wanted this, like, I don't know, it was like Texas A&M or Texas Tech. That's what it was. They had this, and it seemed like very cool and like a good idea, this massive grading engine that, papers went in, and then, people graded, and, the final product came out. And they're like, basically to get that deal, like, hey, we want you to rewrite that. I can't remember what we called it. Enormous amount of work, never even saw the light of day. It never,
Mm-hmm.
it never became a thing. So, you know, choose your. It seemed like it would be applicable to beyond Texas Tech, but in retrospect, it was pretty bespoke to them, and a lot of work and a lot of wasted effort.
And I think the circle back to the point which you mentioned is difference between signal and noise. I think that kind of the circles back to this. You also briefly, I think, have touched upon that adoption side when the ecosystem was evolving, the LMS side of things, and I think back then you mentioned people were kind of submitting on a piece of paper. So how did that adoption was like for you? I'm sure the students were using paper, but the system, the entire algorithm was kind of on the computer, right? So how did
Right. So the
this
early
entire thing?
days, especially in high schools and districts that were, now there's like, one child, one computer type thing. But back then there was like, they called it the digital divide. So students didn't necessarily have access to computers. They were handwriting stuff. So I would say in the earliest days, especially in high schools, there was some like, well, we can't digitize our students' work. So, that kind of quickly eroded. But um, there, one thing that came out of being able to submit, at first it was like a cut and paste text in the box. And
Mhm.
then we started accepting document formats, PDF, and that brought another lot of pain. And then eventually, one of the big things I worked on was, for students or for rather teachers to use something like GradeMark where they grade the paper. A lot of it is predicated on the formatting and like things that aren't text. So I created a system where we'd take your document, we'd convert it to no matter the document into a PDF, and
Mhm.
then rasterize the PDF, and also find the text, take the text, basically a picture and the bounding boxes of those individual text elements, and string it together um, into a product where you could, basically highlight text as if you were in Word, but it was, fac- facsimile? No, facsimile. Yeah. Um, of what was really happening. Or if you were to use the native application. Um, and in doing so, we really opened up GradeMark. So that was something we decided. It was like, hey, this would make it so much more pleasing to the eye, a lot more usable to see it in its native font and its spacing and formatting. But that was a pretty massive undertaking. And I would liken it to, if you think about Google Books, they've.
Yeah.
But at that, that was kind of really new technology. I remember there was someone else doing something similar, and I can't remember who bought it. It was like Box or one of these early storage companies bought them just for that technology. So it was pretty cutting edge at the time.
And when you kind of took this challenge, like what is the timeline we're looking at? Was it probably a 6 month or a year project? Kind of, it looks like a project or a product in itself, right?
Yeah, that project I don't think ever finished per se. I mean, it's always you get the MVP working, and that took probably a good year. I mean, there were so many complications. We had to set up windowless or headless like Windows stations, workstations, servers to open up Word and basically print the PDF so it would look as if it were, you had to use the native application. You couldn't use some, Open Libre or one of these open source things that would look like crap. And then that whole thing was really complicated. And then just with each little piece, there's so many moving pieces. There was issues in PDFs, although it seems like everything is linear. There's nothing to say in a PDF that the layout of the text, like if you convert it to text, it won't be in reading order. And you need to determine what are headers and footers and footnotes and So it was this document layout analysis. It was a large project, and meanwhile we built a search engine, the thing that building all this, and a web crawler. So the web crawler also had to take these documents and do the same thing. So it touched on everything. It was a massive project. Yeah.
And see, in the year we are in, which is 2024, things sound easy, but I'm sure when you were building this would be a million times kind of difficult because because of the available resources and probably lack of resources to understand how to solve a simple problem, which is today it could be just write few lines on Perplexity and you have the answer, or ChatGPT. But back in the days, probably you would be spending for a small problem, you would be spending days just to solve it. I'm sure things would be like that. Do you recall any of the moments like that, which you see today would be futile, but
Now I look at today's a better day, but back then ingenuity and know-how, problem solving were very much a competitive advantage. Because nowadays, so many things. I mean, just rolling back, the technology stack. Back then, we used this new open source project that was called, like Michael Stonebreaker at Berkeley created this open source database, because we couldn't afford Oracle, called Postgres. So we used Postgres, Linux, everything free. We were writing in Perl, CGI programming, and then JavaScript became more prevalent. We're just handwriting our own JavaScript, and they were starting to have these JavaScript libraries. And the other big lesson learned is picking the right horse in the race. In that, you had this application service architecture of how to actually write the web pages, and we did everything wrong. And chose the wrong, I chose YUI, Yahoo's user interface library. Now everybody uses React, but before React, there was all these different, libraries. And the other thing about it was so fast moving to keep up with it. But yeah, you name one thing, you can spin up a server now. Now you don't have to go buy it, provision it, do all the hard manual work and getting it up to speed, networking, blah, blah, blah. Nowadays, if you're going to do analyze a PDF document for its layout and extract text, there's state of the art document understanding models that you could use right off the shelf. The world has kind of settled on React to a certain degree. So you don't necessarily choose the wrong language and the wrong framework. The the downside, and the other thing is we create our own database software for our search index. Nowadays, there's there's an explosion in databases, from every shape and form, not only relational like Postgres and MySQL, but every variant thereof. And again, the file systems we used funny enough, not funny, kind of infamously enough, we found, because we stored everything, each object that we crawled as a file, and file systems weren't necessarily up to the task of having a huge number of files. And we found one file system that worked the best. It's called RiserFS. Well, Hans Reiser is in jail right now for killing his wife. We actually had lunch or breakfast with him one day, so it was kind of like, oof. Prior to that, so all these things, file systems, object stores, we had to roll it ourselves. And nowadays you don't. The negative is, in today's, you can have an idea and quickly execute on it, but everybody else can too. So the game has shifted in some ways. So time to market is very much shortened.
Now, if you look back, and of course you are seeing the market right now being in edtech today as well, the moat, what probably when you were building things in the beginning, the moat was totally solving these very, very difficult problems. Now, you can solve these small problems, which are very difficult, but these are small problems. Of course, you can solve them fast. You have a lot of resources, a lot of cognitive resources are available for free, kind of free. Now, if somebody would, or you were to build this now, or any new product right now, how you would differentiate the product, or how would you find the moat, like just from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, you're right in the sense the moat back then. There was plenty of other competitors that would come up, but every single one of them didn't have a crawler on their back end. They were just searching the search engines, which has scaling issues because you're not supposed to do it. Either that or you pay for it through Bing. Right. So the real moat back then, and still is the student paper database. The fact that we have this huge database, because I think a third of our hits came from other students' papers. And you have to also realize that the papers themselves aren't just, collusion between peers. They're also, like the cheat sites of the old, like where you submit a paper to get a paper to submit. Well, that once those papers are submitted, it's only good for one. So that's what created this whole ghostwriting thing. But even then, ghostwriters, they might cut the corners and not actually write it. So you're kind of take that risk. Either that or you submit it, and by submitting it to see if it flags something, now it's in the database. But so that was a big moat. The other one is we did a deal with Crossref, which, if people don't know, it's a publisher, scientific mostly, but actually publisher consortium that they created the DOI, the document object identifier, so that there was some machine readable thing that could be used across the internet, and you know exactly which document. So they were the ones that assigned those. So it was a natural point for us to talk to them. Plagiarism in academic, scholarly work was also an issue. So we did a deal with them where, we got all the publisher wanted to use Authenticate, which is I like it still there, is our commercially focused product. They could get at a discount if they gave us all their content. So we basically amassed this, basically Google Scholar worth of text. So those are the two big moats. I mean, and the same holds, there's, the moats nowadays are the same. It's either, first to market, how fast you can execute, but the real ones are finding some sort of network effect that creates the moat. and
Mhm.
it's been harder and harder to do because there's so many people thinking about how to do that. So
What do you mean by network effect here, and how it's relevant?
that's kind of a broad term for so network effect. Could be quite literally a network, like a social network.
Mhm.
If another Facebook comes along, they're not going to be able to. They're going to struggle because they don't have all those connections. All your peers aren't there already.
Yeah.
Or it can be in the network effect of people that have used the service enough. Basically the data that's been amassed. If you can
Yeah, I
by
understand.
people using the service, you can leverage that. That's really kind of the broad umbrella.
Fascinating in a way. While I was reading one of the article, I think probably this one. I don't know. Do you remember this
Oh
article?
yeah,
Uh,
we had
could you
that
talk about
picture
this? Yeah.
plastered outside our lab door in Berkeley.
Could you talk about this picture? How was it taken? The story behind it, because it looks cool for the time. Probably this would be
Yeah,
cool today as
so
well.
funny enough that they're like many Yahoo things, it's still not they created this magazine Yahoo Internet Life,
Hmm.
um, and so yeah, they reached out, yet another story, and they're like, hey, we want to do something a little different since it was a magazine. Would you guys be willing to come to San Francisco to do a little photo shoot? Sure. Like, okay, what size are you? Your dimensions for what you wear, and we're like, here they are. So anyhow, we get there. This photographer had bought some suits and what you see at like Ross. You still had the tag, so he could return them. Had a couple computers we were holding, so he took a bunch of photos, and then in post processing, put those papers falling. But
Oh.
yeah, that was probably the most unique uh, experience in terms of publicity. But it's a great picture. I still have it.
And that's a good marketing perspective to it. I mean, if you even if you do this today, it will still get you attention. I mean,
Right.
it's just the same thing, before after kind of thing. It would still work.
Yeah. Now you
Uh,
could do it with
yeah.
like some image generation thing. But
And by the way, the idea, it all came to the guys who were shooting it, right?
that's right.
And this image, I think. Could you talk more about this also? Because this is very. I mean, you look. I don't know. I don't know. It's very confusing. What are you trying to do in this picture?
Okay. Similarly, so this was in so the California student newspaper wanted to do a story on us, and they're like, hey, can you meet at forgetting the name of the coffee shop that's right off campus on the south side. Used to frequent a lot, and it was their idea. Like, here, we want to make kind of an action photo. Here, you guys take these laptops. Here, Melissa, you take this stack of papers, pretend you're reading them, which is ridiculous. That's not how we do it.
Yeah,
But that was
exactly.
that was their idea. Yeah. Basically, if you see an image in a newspaper that looks staged or kind of weird, it's their idea, not the.
But what are your thoughts on doing these kind of activities? I could call them probably stunts, whether that was this image here or this one. Do you think these things are effective, or were effective during when you were building
Yeah,
this?
I think those are. I guess you might call like guerrilla marketing nowadays. No, I think there's a
Yeah.
place for them still. Like, people. Like someone was just telling me about at a conference, how do you become, you know, noteworthy, or you almost have to either think of something clever or make a fool out of yourself. You could have a QR code tattooed on your head, and like, hey, ask me some T-shirt or something. Or this, I think someone was telling me about they put a bunch of money in ice and then let it slowly melt, and so everybody was kind of waiting for another dollar bill to fall out. But in the meantime, they're sitting around this thing, reading or talking to people. So I think they're hard to pull off, but I think if you're creative, there's a role for the artistry of marketing still, I guess.
You spoke about the media also. You were getting enough media coverage. I think you spoke about this, and you think getting those customers like in the beginning, first 3 5 years, does the media impacted in attracting the customers or kind of just building credibility? How did you like? What was your analysis of that?
Yeah, I guess I would liken it to Academy now, and probably some of the naivete doing another ed tech startup in terms of, if you think of the marketing funnel, there's problem aware. The media did a great job of indicating there's a problem. I mean, you talk to most instructors, they probably know it, but it became a topic of conversation in the zeitgeist. And then there's solution aware, which is also in the article if they're talking about us. So it very much was top of the funnel, you know, um, for us. And creating a market, part of that is, getting early adopters. And your earliest adopters are going to be individuals. And then eventually, hopefully, you can get to a point where they can become, you can, again, this land and expand. And for an institution to buy your service, like a high school, the bigger the institution, like the high school versus the district versus, a small community college versus Cal State system, credibility and how long you've been around and your ability to service contract, all those things become more and more prevalent the bigger you get. So, and you only can build that credibility, and all that was with your initial small customer base. So, over time, you're really creating, setting the stage for larger and larger deals, I guess is one way to say it.
And when all of this was happening, when you were kind of getting that traction, probably at the stage where you were kind of attracting the early adopters and probably early majority as well. How were you communicating with the world? So by this, let me expand on this a little more. How you were writing things, like were you mindful or aware about that? I'm just kind of trying to only attract the early adopters. Everything that you guys used to kind of roll out. I don't know how you were marketing back in the days or the sales guys were doing it all along. But but were you conscious about speaking a certain way or kind of using certain vocabulary or certain keywords in the way you were communicating? I would love to learn more about what worked for you guys back then.
Yeah, it's, I guess preface this by saying we didn't really get a marketing department or even a person much later. I mean, it was really kind of a one person marketing machine, John doing interviews. And, I just a small anecdote. The time I joined the lab, we were back to back. And for some reason, that, wasn't necessarily planned. I sat next to him throughout, then and then through iParadigms / Turnitin for years. I don't know. So anyhow, that way of setting the stage, I heard all his media conversations. And, he's kind of a salesperson at heart. He really sold the problem. And he even got a little bit hyperbolic at times. I think for the Economic Times, he wrote, and he was needling because the other thing, just again aside, and I'll probably lose my full train of thought here, is we always thought the big brands would be the first to adopt this, the Harvards, the Stanfords, and all this. They have the money, they have the clout. They were the last. We even got Berkeley while we were there. Still getting our degrees. Even after I left, I don't think we even, or while I was still in the company, we still didn't have them. It is because they have the most to lose, right? The reason this plagiarism detection sold in the first place, and it sold much better in education than it did commercially, is because they have a bigger risk profile. Their brand, the bigger the brand, the more they have to lose. So they're kind of the last. They don't want some cheating scandal on their hands to tarnish their degree, their brand. So it was all along, it was the teacher, the early adopter, or the community college. They're really just trying to teach these kids. They don't care about brand. And the messaging. So, all right, back to the Economic Times. So there was one, I think it was Economic Times, article that he said that, yeah, if Harvard used our service, it would be like a nuclear bomb went off. Which raised eyebrows. He got some flack for, but he was a provocateur. How about that? And
Interesting.
kind of making the problem, as big as it should be, and maybe even a bit more. So in terms of language, later, once the marketing people came involved, sure they crafted certain things, but the real traction came from that. And then you asked about salespeople, not until much later. The salespeople were, glorified order takers. We had so much inbound interest. It was just about, so there was no, later on there was the big game hunting of trying to get some bigger deals and whatnot, business development. But in the early days, it was just about fulfilling orders and, answering questions. And, there was high intent. And back then, again, it was email and phones. It wasn't, video calls or it's even, going to their school.
So I think I was reading about I think one of the LinkedIn posts, and you spoke about that you are a physicist who stumbled in edtech, and you also mentioned about the background that you have, which is physics, somehow inspires innovation in edtech. Could you talk more from that perspective? Like how do you think about it?
Yeah, I guess one someone I worked alongside with at Lincoln Labs, she got her physics degree from MIT, and she's like, it's really hard to be, a strong physicist in your field, but go to any other field and you usually can do quite well. Which is to say, I think the tools you learn in physics are generalizable. And one of them is problem solving, like how to break something into its constituents and solve them separately and reassemble them. What assumptions you can make, how can you generalize, how can you simplify, that, and understanding kind of the mechanics of how things work, whether they be, computer processes, human interaction. I would say it's a generally applicable.
I mean, that's what Elon Musk talks about. Elon Musk also talks like the way you are mentioning, like the fundamentals of physics is what he kind of says that it's what helps him also kind of think, back to first principle. So that
I mean, one thing you did, and trying to teach my own kids too, it's like, it's like practicing a violin, which I played, or doing anything to get better at it. The incremental gains are, they're almost hard to notice. But if you look at the span of the whole entirety of it and kind of reflect on what changed, the whole, how I view the world is different now. Just how I mix, sense making of the world, my world model, if you will, has changed. And part of that, and that applies to everything. So people, the physical world, whatnot. So it's all informed by the same thing. I always used to say that, if absolute truth is in the center of these concentric circles, studying something, deeply as you get closer and closer to one thing is to knowing that truth, but it also brings you closer to all the other disciplines of truth. Your distance to them becomes smaller.
So this analogy is quite interesting. So what you're referring is, as we kind of immerse ourselves in any of the subject, we get closer to the smallest possible circle, which could be a point, and that is truth. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that'd be absolute truth, right? Like
Yeah,
all knowing.
yeah.
The point of it is that, kind of back to the, like, in her case, she went from physics PhD to meteorology. Um,
Yeah.
it's very adjacent, a lot of the same
Yeah.
tools, but even I would say, this is why you have, people studying quantum mechanics talking to, people in philosophy or Buddhists, and it's like, um, there's some kind of latent truths that are uncovered about the world. Um, there's a lot of specifics too. I mean, you're laser focused more and more so on one very small thing, but in doing that, you pick up all this other knowledge, I would say.
And so is of course I'm sure you also believe this, and I certainly I do this. The way we think, and that that ability to dissect things and ability to compute well decides most of our success. I don't know how much you agree to this, but what are your thoughts? And then, and while you were building Turnitin, and I think it's 20 more than 22 decades of your journey, how your worldview has shifted to solving a problem and towards success. How do you see all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I and it's kind of said off the cuff, and I want to say it from the beginning. Whether you call it this or not, luck plays a huge role in success. It's not the only thing, but essentially being, that's and you can't create that necessarily. You can create the grounds for it, which in my case was studying, going to school. Happen. Basically, you can put yourself in an environment
Hmm.
where success, that lady luck, you have a better chance of meeting her.
Hmm.
Which is why a lot of entrepreneurs move to San Francisco. Back in the day, probably still do, just because you're going
Yeah,
to
they
be
do.
rubbing shoulders with people like that. There's going to be more opportunity. But there's that. But the success, the other hallmarks are hard work. There's no, even if you're the most gifted person, you still have to work hard. And then, um, and yeah, taking the harder route rather than the easier one, um, which was kind of what I tend to do. I guess I made a decision a long time ago to delayed gratification, where, that Friday night where I was working in the lab, although it didn't
Yeah,
feel good, I knew it would pay off at some point. So,
yeah, and I think it did. Could you talk about like how the journey of Turnitin was for you in like during the kind of the culmination period? I think this was 2015 for you, if I'm
hmm
not mistaken. Yeah, could you talk about the journey?
yeah. So, here you company, we just to kind of put a small timeline together. We, as I already said, we started, it was a group of us, people came and went. There was real no money. We raised some money. We started getting revenue. We eventually got into the black, revenue
Hmm.
wise. We could start paying people. We could start paying ourselves. We could get an office. So we were very much bootstrapped. We never spent more than we earned. And if anything, one of the early, then we took on some more money. There was a process when we were dancing with all these publishers. We tried to sell ourselves. No one bought, thankfully. The other thing is, word of wisdom is, which is true, is your first, you're so petrified in your first startup, a failure, that, you know, uh, people sell too early. Um,
Hmm.
so in that case, that would have been us selling too early, but thankfully it didn't happen. But as part of that process, we took some risk off the table. So someone put in a large sum of money, most of which just went to us, the founders and shareholders. Um, and so, yeah, we could breathe a little easier. But yeah, so we just grew, and the point of bringing him into the picture was he told us, what you want to do is your margins, you want to try to increase them year after year, which is we did, amazingly. And right, so then come around, we're building business, hiring more people, getting international business like in England, and growing the feature set with Grademark, going international. Um, and then in 2000, and by this point, we're tens of millions in revenue, hundreds of people. And Microsoft came a knocking,
Yeah.
and we decided, we're like, all right, let's, we weren't even sure of their interest, but they flew us up there. And kind of funny story, the CTO of Microsoft at the time was, yeah, so a lot of people, they even told us, they were just asking questions about what we do, and and he's like, a lot of people, when they join Microsoft, companies, they buy a little place out in the Puget Sound. And I'm like, why is he telling us? Are they going to buy us? um, so long story short, we decided, okay, well, if they're going to put a, offer on the table, we're going to put it out to bid. So that's what we did. And Warburg Pincus, private equity firm, won the bid. Thankfully, again, they didn't. They took 51%. So we took more money off the table, risk, if you will. And then we were with them for like 7, 8 years. And then at that point, Insight Partners came in. I didn't have to sell, but I was so burnt out and done. I sold the rest of my share and stayed on as a contractor for a while, but ultimately left. But it's continued to grow. So does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It does. And you exited in 2015, and I think you totally just moved on. Like even the contractor stuff was kind of all over.
Right. So I'm burned down. Like there's all these things that, I have kids at this point, and the demands, the thing about, it's almost like becoming a professor. Like if you really enjoy science, you're like the victim of your own success. You become a professor, and then you get this big lab, and then what you find yourself is all you're doing is writing grants and managing people. You're not even doing the thing you like anymore, is the science. And it's kind of true with business as well. All of a sudden, you're with the success, you're hiring and managing teams, and you're not doing the fun stuff anymore. So that's where I found myself. Right. So when I left, I was like, I'm going to do all those things that I never had time for, some of which I did, but I realized pretty soon that, I need to have some sort of focus or something to be, not obsessed, but it's obsessive about, like something to focus my mental energies. So I initially did this company, Deep Grammar, because we had, it was like, I witnessed the advent of, neural networks or deep neural networks. It was actually at the NIPS conference, Neural Information Processing Systems conference, where the Word Vec paper was, there. The DeepMind Atari thing was there, and like the other thing was like Zuckerberg was like giving an address and stuff. I was like, okay, something's happening. So while at Turnitin, we had, it was buy versus build, professional management. They like to buy and not build. Engineers like to build. A grammar checking system as part of our grading, like our Grademark, where the idea is automate as much as we can for the grader so they can focus on high level details and not like mechanics, like spelling and grammar and these sort of things. So we ended up renting ETS's, Educational Testing Services, E-Rater, not really cut out and meant for this sort of thing. It was, as impressive it was using a rule-based system and some machine learning, the new deep learning models performed a lot better. So anyhow, we spun up this company, Deep Grammar. Grammarly was already, but we can compete against them. Long story short, we decided to. I kind of saw the writing on the wall, and it's slowly becoming the case, which is grammar checking is going to be like spell checking. It's just going to be a free service that's incorporated in everything, and that's what's happening. So then I kind of ambled on my own doing different projects of interest, and then met with Prashant and Webhub from McCadley, and decided to kind of be a late stage co-founder with them and help raise some money. Two very smart guys, liked what they had built and what the promise for it could be. So that's kind of where I ended up, where I am today.
And how did you find Vaibhav and Prashant? I mean, was it a stroke of luck?
It was luck on their part. It was, LinkedIn. They found me, and I think they were looking for, capital, which, I'm like, well, I can help be an advisor if you'd like and give you some advice. And, that turned into, okay, we can work on capital, but here, I'm going to be part of this if we're going to do that. And we all agreed.
And how do you how do you see Academy, or what's the vision of Academy in your mind?
Yeah. And it's, the pandemic was either favorable to your business or hard on your business. Sadly for Academy, so I had joined just before. It was hard on the business because at that point, they're getting a lot of traction, but it was very much just for your listeners, if they don't know what Academy is, it's meant for in-class student engagement, with the polls, quizzes, discussions, things of that nature. And the other one is a way to automate taking attendance for any size class. So very much an in-person class thing. They quickly pivoted to include Zoom, but it wasn't soon enough. There was a scramble to figure out what people were going to use. Zoom was one of those companies that definitely did well by it. And so it was a little too late. I mean, it's an amazing product, but so, the bottom dropped out. So now, but, what's interesting is in some ways it's sharpened the focus is, a few things culminated with the pandemic. I think I've written a little bit about this, which is one, students became very, I saw it with my own kids, disengaged, and that hangover from the COVID still is an effective, all-time absenteeism, disengagement, and, all levels of education. Secondly, I call it the attention economy. The year my kids were born was when the year the iPhone came out, and so that here, we used to call that digital natives. There's like mobile natives, and they're very much part of the attention economy. So teaching these kids now is completely different than probably you and I, although I don't know how old you are, but where, you partly grew up in it. It's a whole different thing. So, the reason there's disengagement is this kind of holdover from COVID, but also this attention economy thing. Like how students are used to interacting with their environment has changed. So education has to change. So, some of the things have changed because of education, because of COVID, for instance, is a lot of schools have gone like high flex or hybrid, where you can either, you have to come to class one day, but you can be remote. Like essentially what's happened with Turnitin, despite having this huge office, layout, it's all remote now. They're going to get rid of their, so some businesses have gone all remote. And education is now this blend, depending on the student. I think there's one way versus the other is better for them. But the classroom, there's kind of a renaissance in what the classroom meant. Once we got students back in the classroom, and realizing how special that is, the need for engaging them has become a lot more apparent. Basically to lean into the attention economy thing, the lectures have to be interesting, engaging. There's a saying that, in higher education, the sage on the stage, like some professor groaning on about some subject and, everybody taking notes and checking their phone and versus very much active learning. People are engaged in the material, but so that combined with student success and, in the United States, it's an abysmal, like 50% ish. I think it's either 40 or 60 of students that enter higher education drop out. And that's a terrible rate.
Yeah.
And there's different reasons, socioeconomic, but a lot has to do with student success. And, it surprised me more people don't think of it this way. Is like, I see it with my own kids. They're seniors now in high school. They're very much heavily managed. Every class takes attendance. There's, late homework. There's just, and then they have parents, and all of a sudden they go off to college. No parents, no one asking them to necessarily come to class. All this stuff, and you wonder how many students fail. Because there's no handoff, if you will. And students haven't built up the agency yet. So you have to help them build up the agency. So long story short of, what we're really pushing on now is attendance and just how crucial it is. It's the number one predictor of student success besides socioeconomic. So it's kind of like with Turnitin, we used to say, why grade the paper if it's plagiarized? So in other words, in our workflow, we check the paper, and then once it's worth grading, then you start grading it, and then you could do peer review and all the stuff, just kind of circle. Well, it's kind of like teaching a kid. Unless they show up to class, you're not teaching them.
Yeah.
And it still shocks me that in the United States that how much academic freedom and not taking attendance is taken over. Because it's known that it's a huge predictor of success, yet people don't do it. So hopefully we can turn the tides there. And, we're getting some real interest, and, we have a novel product that works better and differently than anything out there. So.
Mm-hmm. And the adoption is something which is a function of the times we are in, the ecosystem, the demand. It's a very complex mesh or a rubric which is difficult to decipher by anybody, if I'm not wrong here. So I'm sure you guys are on the way to figuring this out. And like, do you have a game plan or an exit plan, or like it's just the process that you think will work for you right now? Like what's the mindset like in terms of making
Right.
it
So
work?
I was, to any entrepreneur, you really have to understand the market you're in, and there's always sub markets, and then there's finding that product market fit, which can be tough to do. And sometimes you get lucky, like Turnitin, to use the market, there's the pain point, there's the pain medicine, and then there's the vitamin. It's harder to sell the vitamin than the pain medicine. So in this case, it's finding exactly who has that pain and exactly what does it look like and how can you address it and make it repeatable. And then there's the problem of finding those people, right? And then interacting with those people, which again, the press was amazing because it's just blankets, the both problemware and solutionware was taken care of. So yeah, that's atypical. Um, so, it's a different, so for us, it's been a journey of finding exactly, especially with, the turmoil of COVID, finding the people that really could benefit from a service like ours. And then how to properly, to your point earlier, use the language to address their needs.
I'm sure you guys are moving in the right direction. And Christian, last but not the least, if you were to probably advise or give a piece of advice to your younger self in terms of the business sense, what would those?
Um, Me as an entrepreneur, or
Yeah, you as an entrepreneur, what you have
yeah,
learned so far?
I talk to other entrepreneurs. No, it's kind of, I've already touched on all of them, but it's, it really is 80% marketing and sales and 20% what the product is, um, in terms of like difficulty. Um, Not always, but typically, you know, know like customer and focus in on a few enough that you don't have that signal and noise problem, but as few as possible to iterate to really figure out their problem and how to solve it. That's key. Don't go too broad. Those, and then how to know when you have product market fit. I mean, I think a lot of, you look at all these startups and why they fail. There's a ton of reasons, but a lot of them is they just never got traction, right?
Yeah.
That's one failure mode, I should say. So learning how to do that, and that takes experience, and the benefit is, I guess the other one is, and I very much believe in this, is always be learning. Be curious. Dig into stuff. All of us. You look at the number of executives today that started their business. They never went to business school. You learn it on the job. Michael Dell, Zuckerberg, all these people. It's a lot of it's just common sense, and sure, there's some, when it comes to legal and finance, there's a little more to it, but but grow with the business, I guess, is a way of.
Perfect.